This is the Seers See podcast, where we explore the seer gift within the Kingdom of God mindset.
2, 1. Hello.
Hey, Dag.
Oh my. So this episode should come out over what is Labor Day weekend here in the US, which is also when, drum roll please, Seers See, the book, will be officially released.
That's awesome. I know I have people talking and asking me when the book is going to be here. So that's
It'll be September 1st on Kindle and available to buy through Amazon, a paperback. I'll get it on Barnes and Nobles, and I'll get it other places too. But in the short term, right now,
can pre-order on Amazon. I did notice that. So
yeah, Kindle you can. And then for a day, it was top 50 of spiritual warfare.
Nice.
So anyway, it's algorithms are funny. It's because I emailed out I sent an email out to my subscriber list, which I have not done for a couple of years. And, so I apologize if you're on there. Like, where you been? Well, I'm back. So,
so one thing too, because you aren't going to tell people to do this. If you're thinking about buying it, even if you aren't able to purchase right now, go ahead and add it to your wish list. Put it in your cart. That's going to help the numbers and get it out there to more people. And so that's important. And, of course, share and like the videos. Typical stuff to do.
I do have a hard time self-promoting.
Yeah, I can promote anybody except for myself. So
I rarely say, if you like the video, like, share. I mean, the people I really enjoy, they say it every time, on YouTube. Guy has 1 million subscribers. If you like the video, like, share. If you dislike it, come back next time. I kind of like that. But, I've always felt like people who are searching for this material, the Lord will guide them.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, that's kind of dumb. It's not dumb. That's wonderful. And yet the Lord's like, yeah, but you need to do your part too.
Paul still had to write letters.
Yeah. He sent them with people, and people made copies of them. I mean, you still have to participate. So this goes back to the image of God. Like, God created, and Adam had to name. Like, they had a role to play. And Eve was tending the garden, and they were tending the garden. Like, they had a job to do. So you need to, like, we are co-rulers, so we have to do our part to get the word out. So
yeah, and also like comments, any kind of feedback, man. I've been getting great feedback. And, I was telling a friend the other day, I said, I think I kind of expected to record this and have it fade off into the ether and never have to think about it again. It's like, okay, I did my part. And I am getting people calling me, like literal phone calls, going, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So, because you and we're just talking. This is just me.
Yeah,
us. I mean,
usually I say, I think we'll talk about this section in the chapter, which I did right before we clicked record. And then we kind of go with it, right? Because we're talking about the material, but it is available. This recording is on podcast now. I think I have it on Apple and Spotify and Amazon and various places. So, like, I'm doing my part, and hear me. That was to the Lord. I am doing my part, and that's, he knows I'm joking. Like, God knows I'm joking with him.
Oh, he's got excellent sense of humor. He doesn't believe that needs to study the platypus. So, I mean,
or just look at your nose. I said that at church once. If you don't think God has a sense of humor, look at your neighbor. Now look at your neighbor's nose.
Oh, we better stop the list there, because there's a lot more funny things that we could go into. So
yeah. So, all right. Ghosts. I wanted to last time we did discuss a little bit about ghosts, and you kind of mentioned in passing. Well, I wasn't really prepared for this, but we ran with it. And so I thought, well, let's just go ahead and go back to that. So, like, obviously, the Bible has the Old Testament law, Leviticus specifically, has guidance that says, yeah, don't talk to the human dead.
Right.
And what we said last time was, well, there aren't rules. They wouldn't make that rule. If there were no such thing as a human dead, or the possibility of talking to a ghost, which a ghost is a disembodied human spirit, he would have said there's no such thing as a ghost, right? Like, or there would have been one word for all of it.
Right. And there's not. And you opened up the section with ghosts are not demons. You make a very bold statement there, because everywhere on Facebook I keep coming across these memes, and don't get your theology from memes, people. Just don't do it. That's Oh, there are no such things as ghosts, and people who want to claim that they're all demonic spirits out there trying to instill fear. But you've got some interesting stories about how people are comforted by these ghosts and the past loved ones. And I just like, it's so at odds, because when I see people who well, those of us who do see demons and we've seen ghosts, they're a totally different flavor. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. There's nothing alike about the two. And so the fact that there's people who can look at it, it's like looking at a dog and a cat. You don't need somebody to explain that to you. And if you're a seer seeing this stuff, you don't need somebody to explain it to you. And sorry that we can't get you, we can't lend you our eyes for a little while to be able to see that. So, but
Yeah.
and
Yeah. It's and so why does it matter? Because I emphasize it, and then I say, yeah, but don't go talking to either one, because often you can't tell.
Mhm.
Like, the only spirit you really should be talking to is the Holy Spirit, unless an angel maybe comes with you with a specific message. I mean, there are always caveats. There are disclaimers to these blanket statements. But generally speaking, I think you get my point. Like, don't go. If you see your disembodied spirit of your deceased grandmother, don't go talking to her. Or certainly don't listen to her if she talks back. There's our alarm bell. That's breaking what God has set up, the barrier. That's breaking the rules. And
Yeah.
I think that's breaking the rules. So don't do that. That's when the alarm bells go off. However, so why do I draw the distinctions? Because seers see these things, and I've had many seers write and go, I don't understand how a demon could be comforting me in a way that seems so godly. If this is a demon, I'm like, well, this is probably not a demon. It's probably just, your deceased father. Or there's a couple stories in there that are pretty good and interesting and emotional.
Yeah, they are. And as I was reading them, I was remembering my biological grandmother died when my mom was 18 months old. And my grandpa was a widow with 2 boys under 10 and an 18-month-old girl. And he was at an all-time low trying to figure out how to keep the kids. He was considering putting them into the children's home at that point in time. And one night while he was praying, he looked up at the foot of the bed and he saw his wife standing there and saw her just disappear into the arms of Jesus. And from that point on, he was able to rebuild his life. Now, was that a demon who's going to show him something like that? That makes no sense.
Makes no sense, right? And so this again, we're using the narrative of the Bible to build a framework to understand or think through what a seer is seeing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and again, I don't know. I've never seen a spirit. I've never seen a ghost. I've never seen a demon. Sometimes you pick up on things and like your discernment sort of goes off, but I've never actually seen anything. I'm just going from eyewitness accounts. And and I also have seen recently on Facebook memes that ghosts are just demons impersonating, but that just goes contrary, not just to the biblical narrative.
Right. And I actually, as we kind of get into a little bit more of the chapter, you start bringing up some of the biblical support, and I hadn't even thought about including the Teraphim and
Yeah.
the argument. And when I started cracking into that, it's like, ooh, this is good. We need to really explore this. So why don't you tell people
Let's do it. All
are?
right, the Teraphim. Yeah. So, we'll finish that sentence. Not only is that meme go against the biblical record, it goes against human experience, which in the history chapter we sort of talk about. But the Teraphim, yes. So this comes from an academic paper. So I try to root all this stuff into scholarly papers. And what the ancient Israelites sometimes did is they would have little statues called the Teraphim, and they would be representations of their like deceased family members or ancestors. Today, these are not idols,
Right.
all right?
The
We
little
would call them like pictures. I have a picture of my grandparents over there, and they're passed away. Same thing. It's just an image of my grandma and grandpa, and I look at that sometimes. And I remember, have fond memories, and move on. And so, what archaeologists have discovered that the Hebrews did the same thing. Little idols that not idols, little statues called teraphims. And there is, when we go into the law that mentions them. So there's a law in the Bible about bringing a slave into the family. So yes, there is slavery. It's I know that word triggers people, but sometimes people who were slaves, they became greatly beloved, and there was a law to bring them into the family. And the way how the law says is it's a little ritual you go through, which involved an appeal to the ancestors, which if you think about makes sense. Like, you know what, I'm going to adopt someone into the family, and a little ritual which involves grandma and grandpa. I hope it's okay with you too, and then we're just going to move on. However, there's another version of the same law elsewhere in Scripture, where go ahead.
Just gonna say the first one's found in Exodus 1-6 for anyone who wants to double check, and the second one's Deuteronomy 15:12-18.
Yes. So the second version leaves out the appeal to the ancestral spirit. And why? Well, over time, this appeal to the ancestral spirit became like ancestral worship.
Yeah.
Where they were trying to reach out to these things and like I say, whoa, now you're tied to idolatry.
I think, for a lot of people, this is going to be like, wait a minute, God's law changed. Wait, what are you talking about?
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Yeah. So go ahead. Do you?
I'll just give high level, and you give the depth, because this is so amazing. So over in the course of the history of Israel, this practice devolved into ancestral worship, idolatry, which of course is terrible, as forbidden. And so later, I think it was during one of the Reformations, I can't remember which king it was now, Josiah, I think, is what the scholars think. It was during his that law was edited to make it more relevant to that culture. And they took out the bit about, yes, you want to bring a slave in the family, do all the things, but except the part about appealing to your ancestor. Because we don't want to, it's a slippery slope. I think that was the point. It's a slippery slope. The only spirit we should talk to is Yahweh. Let's not worry about the ancestral spirit part. But you know what? There's people still people are still adopting, slaves into their families. So let's just have something. So, the same law is in there twice, and it reflects like 800 years of history where the culture needed, like the leaders were trying to respond to what was going on in the culture. Like the whole Bible wasn't written all at once. It didn't just come down from heaven. Like it was actually being applied. People were studying it. And at one point, the king's like, yeah, that law, man, that was slippery slope. Let's take that. Let's just edit that out. And you know what? The Lord breathed on that. That was God inspired when whoever, I think it was King Josiah, but whoever actually did the editing.
Yeah.
Okay, so now give the context, everything I left out, because I'm giving high level.
No, because that's really the core of it. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, ooh, God's law changed. What are you talking about? Because we're taught that it never changes. So just two examples of where God's law changes to kind of support the point you're making. We have the bronze serpent in the desert. And that is kept as a remembrance of the great work of healing God did through that artifact. But then King Hezekiah, and this is in 2 Kings 18:4, he has it broken up and he has it destroyed. Because even though it was used in this holy event, the shift in the culture now made it harmful. It posed a danger to the people. And
they were worshiping it.
Yeah. Yeah, they were feeding it food and bringing it sacrifices. I mean, it was not good. And, it's that old thing of valuing the gift above the giver. And the other thing to remember, too, in Exodus, we're still talking about a nomadic people living among lots of other nations that they're coming in contact with, that they're having to kind of make peace with on a certain level at certain times, and just kind of function within this broader cultural context. By the time we get to Deuteronomy, whether we're talking about a later editor or even now we're going to a settled type of governmental system where you aren't having to make concessions or provisions or any kind. And I'm not saying God's saying it's okay to do whatever the pagans are doing, but sometimes God allows us a little bit of wiggle room, a little grace for us to extend grace in order to function within society. And it's like I grew up in a Southern Baptist family. They didn't drink. We didn't talk about drinking. We would still go to restaurants that had bars in them as long as you didn't sit at the bar. I mean, it's that kind of thing. And
Also, I've said it many times now. They came out of Egypt. Now they're getting Egypt out of them, and that involved worldview changes, which sometimes took generations to achieve.
yeah,
And even in us today, we'd call that sanctification. You get saved. Some people get rescued from addictions and sin all the time. But for others of us, it's a struggle, and you're working out your salvation, and you're bringing every thought, every act, every addiction, whatever, to the Lord and submitting it. And it takes time. And there's some sort of immediate non-negotiables, but a lot of the other things is a journey of salvation, a journey of faith. So yeah, I mean, initially they had these statues, and that was allowed, and later they're like, enough with the statues, man. You're not supposed to worship these things.
right.
Yeah, just like if you have, we see these, and people will have pictures of their ancestors, and then they'll have the beads around it, and maybe candles in front of it, and woo, you can't, slippery slope, is what I would say. So, how's that related to ghosts? Well, one, these people were contacting ancestral spirits, i.e. ghosts. But two, if you go to a cemetery and you just want to have a talk with your deceased relative or friend, that's okay.
Yeah.
Not like you're not trying to conjure up the spirit. You're just going to the grave and go, Grandma, I really miss you.
Mm-hmm.
Grandpa, that last conversation we had, I love that.
You aren't taking a chicken wing and a black cat, or you aren't doing a ritualized thing. You're just remembering.
Yes, right.
That's part of the human grief process. So yeah, I think we forget that the Bible makes room for us to be human. That's kind of the whole point, is the value of humanity in this. And
to be truly human and not a slave to any of these things. Now, if Grandma suddenly manifests, if an Elohim comes out of the grave and starts talking back, whoa, 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 whoa! In the name of Jesus, go where God has prepared for you. I'm just here to grieve a little bit. I don't know what you are. So, it slippery slope. I mean, that slippery slope took generations to happen. And yes, this is sourced. I have the article, the journal article is linked in there. Yeah, and I applied this to a specific situation that someone had written in about they were experiencing, which is why the value, scholars help us understand the word.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, maybe the first time I heard about, the law changed. I thought that it came down perfect, and I didn't understand that inerrancy, like God worked through humans to produce this work, including editors. Yep. Which is that produces the inerrancy.
Well, and the other thing, the law shifting, the big example I almost overlooked, the whole temple complex with Christ's life, death, and resurrection, the whole cult, ritual, ceremonial side of Judaism, we're now free of that as Christians. So if we say that the laws of God do not change in accordance with societal, cultural, even geographic, constraints, we're missing a point. Now, I think we should be very clear that the function around the law might change, but the intent of the law stays consistent.
100%.
So sometimes you do see that the practice has changed, but the point is it's always pointing to God's revealed truth. So we don't want to bypass that. And we're not saying don't trust the Bible. And it's still good to know these laws, even though they don't apply, because they do inform us of a lot of things. And so
Yeah, they inform us of worldview, of the value of humans, value of women, particularly in the ancient world. I mean, it's just amazing what the law does to protect women, and it informs us about ideas like I'm thinking of that God is the source of life, and so whenever you touch something that's dead, yeah, you are now ritually unclean. So you have to do a ritual to become clean. Why does a ritual make you do that? It's teaching you about God and about you, that God is the source of life. Anything that soils us with death is not from God. Like death is an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, death is an enemy, and it will be defeated someday.
Yes. Yes. And yeah, and I call those concessions to our human minds because, I mean, how do you teach a child? I mean, I've got a 4 and a 5-year-old going to school right now, and we use a lot of simple object lessons. We use a lot of tangible things to teach lessons, and God's gracious to us, and so a lot of the observances of the Old Testament law, even a lot of observances of the Christian church, are still those kinds of tangible lessons to teach us because God says, "Hey guys, you aren't there yet. We got to get you there," and we count blocks, for a lack of a better explanation. But I did find it very interesting that the Teraphim are so connected to divination. I mean, even going back to Jacob and Rachel, Jacob, he runs away with Jacob and Rachel and Leah. Laban, his father-in-law, runs after him. Why? Because Rachel stole the Teraphim. And Laban straight up says, "I'm a Nakash, I'm a diviner." And he calls the Teraphim his gods. And so you have several places in the Bible where divination or necromancy, the two terms really are conflated. And I think we forget that the terms necromancy, which is speaking to the dead, divination, how were they divining? By consulting the dead. You can't get away from this idea of necromancy and divination. And there are so many scriptures that connect it, like 1 Samuel 15:23. It says rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity, and idolatry is what the ESV has it. But that's teraphim. That's what that word there and for idolatry is.
Didn't one of David's wives have one in her bed?
That would be Michael. She actually, this was one of the larger ones that was probably used as an idol because
Yeah.
big enough to make people think David was in bed sleeping. And so Saul, her father, had teraphim in his palace, and or his home. Probably wasn't a palace at that point, but yeah, it's Josiah who did renounce the use of the teraphim under his rule. And so you have all of these things, and if anybody was this reference for that, that's 1 Kings 23:24. So you have this over and over again connection. And I love the fact that you point out that shift, because that builds a really good case for what the prophets have to say about divination, necromancy, talking to ghosts and the dead. One of the things I actually did, I underlined this 3 times, and it says, we need to make that distinction between communication versus remembering. But okay, we're going to talk about ghosts. We got to talk about the big ghost story in the Bible. And
Do you mean Samuel?
Yeah, we touched on it some last week.
Yeah.
But anytime you bring that up, people always, they have 2 objections. And the first one is, well, that wasn't really Samuel. So
I was thinking about this on the way home from work today. We mentioned it last. Why do people say that? I still can't figure out why people make that claim.
Yeah, because the Bible's clear. Verse 12, when the woman saw Samuel. Verse 14, and Saul knew it was Samuel. Verse 15, and Samuel said to Saul. So you're basically saying the Bible's lying to you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to make that objection.
This desire to flatten out the spirit realm is forcing you to read the book, to misread the Bible, like forcing you to ignore what it just clearly says.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, Samuel had passed away. King Saul, who had teraphim in his house, ugh.
Right.
You know, I don't think David probably didn't, but then but then Solomon ended up with idols too. So, we have this glimmer of, but David had other issues.
Right.
These are not our heroes. But I have a question for you, and maybe we don't want to go down this path, but I was thinking about this. Who was worse, Saul or Solomon?
Ooh. Ooh. Okay, we're gonna have to come back to that one because that's gonna
Yeah, that's a discussion. Maybe we have a discussion. Maybe we have some people on just chew on that.
yeah.
Because I was like, Saul gets all this grief, rightly so. Solomon's, we just celebrate him, but man, he did not end well.
No,
He-
he didn't. Well, and it's funny because talking about
Neither did Saul. Saul didn't end well. Same Saul,
yeah, well, and it's funny because since you brought that up, like you set wheels to spinning. Saul ends up going to the Witch of Endor. And if you follow the extra biblical literature, not the stuff that was actually written by people back in Solomon's day, guys, I'm not saying that this is anything canonical, but a lot of the stuff dealing with talking to the talking to the dead, controlling demons, that sort of thing, has Solomon actually ending up in the same place, at least as far as folklore goes. So that's interesting. I don't know if we want to read too much into it, but I think that's an interesting connection. So, but
yeah. Well, so yeah, Saul, he's trying to, he needs some advice.
let's go talk to the dead guy.
Goes to the witch,
When
but
I'm dead.
I thought it was so interesting how you pointed out last week that the root word for that is the root word for just a spirit of the human dead, right? So
Obalat,
witch, wizard, necromancer,
all of that fits.
yeah.
Yeah.
And people would go, and so what's so sad too is Hebrews were going to her. I mean, she had a business.
Yeah.
It was secret. It was in the black market. It was illegal. But apparently it was just barely illegal because like Saul knew where to go.
Right. I mean, and where did he learn that from the King's Guard? And the King's Guard, I mean, most likely, it meant they knew what was going on, but they weren't enforcing the law because they knew Saul wasn't really all that worried about it. Because Saul was all about image. He was never about actually doing the right thing. He was about image.
Saul didn't have a problem killing the priest of God, but he did have a problem apparently killing the
Yeah. And for more on that, check out Faith and Other Oddities.
yeah. It's it's so sad. But all right, so let's talk about this. All right, so she conjures up. Now, did she know? Like he says, all right, call up Samuel.
Right.
And then she does. And then that's when she has the aha moment. Oh crap, this really is Samuel. And oh my gosh, you're the king. I'm dead.
Yeah. No, I here's what I think. I think she fully expected a spirit to answer. I don't think she really expected it to be Samuel. I think like so many people who have dealt with Ouija boards, tarot cards, any kind of divination, they will tell you straight up, you're going to contact something. What you contact, you have no way of verifying that. And I don't care if you gave Great Aunt Vera the code word so that you would know it was her. No, come on. The spirit realm, it's quick, it's fast, it's not omniscient, but it can seem like that with our slow human perceptions. So yeah, I think it was shocking to her when Samuel showed up.
But she recognized him. Now, granted, he was a celebrity, but he took on the form that she could recognize.
Right. Well,
and she could see him. Now, could Saul see? Did Saul see?
I didn't even stop to consider that.
So yes, I'm saying the Witch of Endor, which by the way, I just love saying the Witch of Endor. I don't know. I think it's King James, but Endor is like a Star Wars word, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe he got that. So
it's located on the slopes of Hermon, just so you know.
Shut up.
Yeah.
So they're on Mount Hermon. Or they're on the edge of Mount Hermon.
Yeah.
So while you're looking it up, and that's where the course. Where it's thought that the Watchers of Genesis 6 came down, and over time it was just like the giant clans were there, the Rephaim were there, all sorts of really horrible Valley of Wailing. It was a Valley of Wailing because the babies would wail when they would sacrifice the babies. It was there. or maybe the parents were wailing while they're in the process of sacrificing their babies. I don't know. They call the abortion the silent scream, by the way.
Yep.
But these were actually post-born babies that they were sacrificing to these demonic gods. And even in the time of Jesus, there were dozens of altars and pagan worship sites there, which they called, of course, the gates to hell, right?
Right.
Mount Hermon.
So this is very real, is what we're trying to say. This was a
Yeah,
normal part of everyday life.
Yeah, it was I've been trying to think of what is an example of, what's an example in our life of something that's that spiritually a dark place. I can't think of one that Westerners would consider, like just a very dark spirit. And it was the tallest mountain, and it's the tallest mountain in the Middle East. In Palestine or Israel, it's the tallest mountain. Mount Sinai isn't that tall.
Yeah.
So of course that's where, it was the paramount. And we've all seen the image of the stars coming down for Paramount Pictures and going over the mountain. That's all. So, okay, back to this. So she's there by the gate of hell. Yeah. Makes perfect sense, because if you're going to call it the dead or demonic spirits, that's where you'd want to be. All right, so Saul rides up there. Wow.
And you ask if he could see. And at first it looks like only she can see, because she describes Samuel to him. But then in verse 15, Samuel and Saul start having this conversation without her being an intermediary. But we don't know, and that could have just been left out because it was unimportant that she was translating between the two or what have you. I don't think we can say definitively is what I was going to say. But yeah, this is so commonplace. Matter of fact, okay, you're going to love this. I found a quote from Irving Finkel. If you're not familiar with who he is the man when it comes to Assyriology. If you're a major...
What's that fancy word you just said?
Assyriology. It's study of the Assyrian clay tablets and languages, and he works for the British Museum. He is amazing. If you're a giant geek like me, you want to get on YouTube and listen to his lectures just for sheer entertainment value. He's the quirky old professor he looks like Gandalf, okay? And he reads all these ancient languages that nobody else reads, and he's amazing. And he actually has a book out called The First Ghost, which I want to get a hold of, which is about ghosts in Mesopotamia. And yeah, it's like I wish I would have had it in time to study for this episode, and it would have been 3 hours long. But anyhow,
we can come back to it.
Well, may have to. So he says, when you know what is going on in ancient Mesopotamia, when you know about the belief system of the world all around there, you can see that it's not by any means a metaphor. He's talking about the Witch of Endor experience here in the Bible. Is not by any means a metaphor or a piece of literary creation, but a day-to-day normal description of something everybody did. This is the man who understands this. And he's not a believer, guys. Okay. I don't want anyone to think, oh, well, she just found some Christian commenter. No, he's kind of a little anti-Christian on some things. And so I like being able to pull from sources from people who aren't necessarily our friend. I mean, I'm not saying he's hostile, but he recognizes some of the limitations that have been placed on his line of work due to religious ideologies. So
this poor woman. So I'm reading this in LEB, and the woman said to him, "Look, you know what Saul did, how he exterminated the mediums and the soothsayers from the land. So I guess he did kill some of them. Why are you setting a trap for me? Why are you setting a trap for my life to kill me?" So she lived in fear while she had this little side business. And Saul swore to her by Yahweh, "As Yahweh lives, you will not be punished for this thing." And so the woman asked, "All right, whom shall I bring up for you?" Whew, that's creepy.
Yeah.
That is all right. Fine. Whom shall I bring up for you?
Mm-hmm.
When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, "Why did you deceive me? You are Saul."
Yeah.
Now I'm emphasizing "are" because it's italicized. It's italicized in LEB because they're putting the verb in. You Saul.
Yeah.
And the king said, "Oh, don't be afraid. And what do you see?" So his voice said, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" And then she describes his appearance. And Saul realized that it was Samuel. Wow. So you just said this. I'm just reading it now. This is reliving the experience. And then Samuel's like, "Why did you disturb me by bringing me up?"
Yeah.
And so, like, why did God allow that? People say, "Why did God allow that?" I think people use the word, "Why does God allow?" way too freely. I'm sorry, but God grants a lot of freedom. A
Yes.
lot of freedom. There is a ton of, there's more freedom than you are aware of.
Yeah, but I think, when you come from I came from a Southern Baptist background. I was 23 years old before I could realized I could raise my hands higher than my shoulders. I didn't know that there was freedom to do this stuff. So I kind of get it because I remember that mindset of this God who's just so meticulously in control of every little thing that even a gnat didn't breathe without his permission. And so, yeah, the idea that we've got a God who says, "Come participate with me, and I really want your input. I want what you bring to the table, not just what I tell you you can bring to the table." I mean, how cool is that? That
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I think some of this idea comes from this sort of early enlightenment when people thought of God as like a watchmaker.
mhm.
And so he just made the watch and he wound it up and they backed off. And so then everything is under his control. And I think that's just not accurate. I mean, that is not like God definitely made what we've been talking about. We have Leviathan, we have other free will spirits, including the Watchers, who one of the son of the Watchers was teaching occult knowledge. So this goes back, this whole situation with this witch, the medium of Endor, which is LEB and ESV, both translate.
Which better?
I like which better. The that this whole thing goes back to the sin of the Watchers, like
Yeah,
tapping into the spirit realm.
absolutely. Well, and that's okay. So the second objection people always bring up is, "Oh, well, this is a special event. That's the reason why it got allowed it to happen this one time." Yada yada, and this one time only. Okay, I will agree it was a special occurrence because it did impact the fate of the rest of the nation. But the other thing we need to remember about the mechanics of how the Bible is structured, the less it describes something, the more normal it is.
Right.
And so, it talks about sacrifices, but it doesn't tell you that it's happening every single day at the temple. It doesn't talk about all the rituals, bathing and immersion that's happening every single day. We could make list of things the Bible does not describe, but
Look,
are going on.
her objection initially is how he Saul exterminated the mediums and the soothsayers,
Mhm.
because the law talks about both
Yeah.
mediums and soothsayers. These
Mm.
are two different types of people with abilities. Some of them some of them can talk to the human dead. Some of them talk to other kind of spirits.
But what's interesting is the Bible lumps them together time and time again.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so who do you know who you're talking to? And so, because I made a list. 1 Samuel 15:34 is Ezra 4:5. I'm sorry, this is the wrong list. But anyway, I made a list of verses, and we don't have time to go into that. It's connected. But what I thought was really interesting, and I've got to bring this up because we're running out of time, and you have an
Hmm.
appointment to keep.
Yeah.
Isaiah 44:24. It says, "Thus says the Lord your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens and spread the earth by myself, who frustrates the signs of the liars and makes fools of the diviners, who turns wise men back and makes their knowledge foolish." That word frustrate, it's an active word. God's saying, I actively intervene and why would he have to do that if it's not working?
Ah, good
He
point.
would not have to step in. That word signs there, the signs that he is frustrating, that's a supernatural event, sometimes translated as the word miracle. And so every time we see this brought up, we start to see that God is actually saying, this is as far as I'm going to let these things happen.
Hmm.
And again, we go back to the law. Why do we have the law if it wasn't possible? Um,
Yeah.
Isaiah 3:1-5. I'm not going to read that, but there's a whole list of people that God says, I'm going to take away from Jerusalem, Judah, their supply and their support. It's a means of discipline. Who does he include? Mighty men, judges, prophets, diviners, elders, men of rank, skillful magicians, and experts in charms.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second, because I saw a question about this on Facebook not too long ago. So the question was, well, hang on. If God's going to take them away, it acts like that they're a good thing. They're a good thing. So how can magicians and enchanters and diviners, judges and prophets, how can they all be a good thing?
Yeah, because everybody used them. It's not necessarily God was using them for blessing or they were fulfilling God's decree, but
Right.
everybody found some kind of support in them. The same reason people go to psychic. I think it was because people perceived them as good, not that they were good.
Yeah, he wasn't saying, "Oh, I granted permission to do that." He's like, "No, I'm not going to just take away the prophets, like so you can't hear from me anymore. I'm going to make sure you take away. You can't hear from the demons either.
Yeah.
Like you're going to be like without any guidance whatsoever as judgment."
Well, and I think we need to remember too in the Old Testament, there's no such thing as a bad prophet. There were false prophets.
Yeah, and what's the false prophet?
Well, yeah, a false prophet's one who says peace when there is no peace, according to Jeremiah. There's somebody who gives you a report you want to hear, even when it defies the truth of what God is going to do. And matter of fact, one of the criteria the rabbi set up is if a prophet doesn't make you angry, if he doesn't say something you don't want to hear, it's probably not a true prophet. So,
I think false prophet also can mean they're getting their word from another spirit.
okay,
A
yeah.
true prophet gets it from the true
So
Yahweh, God.
13:9. God actually acknowledges that the prophets and the seers, they are seeing divine lies. He's not saying that they're seeing incorrectly, but they're seeing the wrong thing. They're seeing the wrong source. And so he even acknowledges that there in Ezekiel 13:9. And I've never heard anyone use that verse to refute the idea that you can't speak to the dead. And they're all this time God has intervened because you got to remember prophets, priests, diviners, necromancers, they're all doing kind of the same overlapping thing. They're consulting ancestors, they're consulting gods, other demons. They have a very similar role within their society. So I don't see any way we can claim that the Bible doesn't say this is possible.
That's so good. And by the way, those people got the skill from the Watchers.
Yeah. Yeah.
From the Watchers.
And how do they know? Because they were up in heaven seeing how the whole thing was designed.
Yeah.
Know how to the rules. And yeah, I do want to bring up one thing who I know I'm like cutting you close here, but
no, you're good.
Irving Finkel, the other thing he said, and this is so good. You're going to love this. He said so many people saw ghosts in the ancient days, and he doesn't think that it's because, bad eyesight, which is one thing, or, misty conditions, ill worms. He doesn't think that's the contribution. He thinks, or the contributing factor. He said, what if, just like we have people who are colorblind today, they see something different? He said, what if there's just more people who had this ability to see? What if, like somebody who's tone deaf and so they hear differently than we do? He said, what makes this impossible? And again, paraphrasing greatly here, but he makes a case that we should all he's disappointed because he hasn't, because he sees it as so normal in ancient cultures. And he thinks that there's something wrong with us today that we haven't seen it, that so many of us haven't experienced it.
I had someone in a small group I was leading several years ago. It was at a university. She was an international student from, I want to say, Ghana. And it came out that I had the seer ministry, and she said, oh yeah, we all can see. Back home.
Yeah.
She said at night everyone could, they all came in at night because they could see the spirits walking the streets, and because they were tuned into it. No, let me rephrase that. They hadn't been taught to color within the lines.
Yeah. Well, my daughter and I, we were talking about right before we recording, and I said, I'm seeing a whole lot more since we started podcasting. But she's like, you're on that wavelength, you're on that frequency. That's where you're operating at right now as you're preparing for this. Just you're thinking about it all the time. And now I'm having to acknowledge things that before I would just brush by. Things I would have just kept going because I'm like, okay, how is that supposed to fit into what we're doing? How, when we record this week, is this part of what is going to inform what I share? And so, and before I'd be like, oh, okay, saw it, and just, I wouldn't have an opportunity to talk about it. I wouldn't bring it up. And then plus also I've got my daughter living here and she's a seer, and uh, we have some great conversations comparing notes. So I think every seer needs another friend. So
That's so great. Or maybe a retreat, which we can plan sometime soon.
Thank you for listening to the Seers See podcast. Opening and closing music is Sun by Jason Callahan. Bumper music includes Just Around the World and Alta Heron by Keela Caps. Music and Seers See podcast are distributed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0.